Hello there and good evening and welcome to another weekly episode of the DNF1 podcast. So I'm your host Adam Burns, and joining me once again, this time via telephone conversation, as we are respecting social distancing and we're going to be recording this in two separate locations, is my co-host Courtney Pine from his house over the phone. So hello Courtney, how are you?
Good evening from the telephone.
So yeah, we weren't able to do this on a Skype call, unfortunately. That was kind of my bad on that, because the microphone that I use is a USB one rather than an XLR microphone. So for those of you familiar with those microphones will know that the XLR ones are the ones that you can plug into a mixer that you can put into separate channels, whereas we record our audio on one channel together. So yeah, kind of my mistake on that one. I didn't really foresee this happening so soon, but we'll make do. I'm sure Courtney sounds fine from what we've done on testing, so
yeah, I'll forgive you. I'll give you some time, but eventually I'll forgive you for the stressful you've done.
And also another apology for myself as well. Now, for those of you that would have seen the YouTube video on our podcast last week would know that we heavily advertised a episode for a new series that we're doing called the Then versus Now series. Basically, long story short, to look at two drivers from different generations that are very similar in abilities and success, and we compare to find out which of the two are the best. And the first episode was going to be Michael Schumacher versus Lewis Hamilton. Now, unfortunately, I've had an absolute manic week with work and other arrangements. I know it's hard to make excuses to try and find time when you're stuck at home at the moment during the lockdown in the UK, but obviously I don't want this episode to be half-arsed, and I really want it to be as good as it can be. So, assuming that there are no further complications, we should be able to roll the episode for you next week. So please do bear with us on that one, and we appreciate your patience. Now, moving on to what we want to talk about this week. So there's been a fair amount of news that's been going on in the Formula One world despite the ongoing situation with COVID-19, and of course we at the DNF1 podcast, we both hope that everyone is staying safe and that everyone is well, and that if anyone is feeling a bit poorly at the moment, I know I felt a bit off this last week, but hopefully it's not too bad and that we're all going to be okay. And obviously,
I think it's good to be cautious, but I feel that we're all developing cases of hypochondria because of this whole thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been feeling a little bit off, like I've been coughing a little bit sometimes, and I know there've been other cases where it sort of just comes and goes, and then you feel a little bit feverish as well. So there's definitely that going on at the moment. And I think,
the common cold hasn't stopped going about,
No, true. I think everyone's sort of in this position where everything else takes us a back seat, and if you start feeling poorly, all of a sudden you start getting paranoid and panicking, thinking that you've got the coronavirus. Unfortunately, because we're in a situation in the UK where we're not really testing people as much as perhaps we should be, and obviously the less we're not going to talk about this too much.
Let's not get too political.
No, it is difficult for us to kind of understand if people have it or not, unless it gets really serious. So no, hopefully everyone is doing well and doing fine, and we will do our best to sort of put a positive spin on it for a little bit of time. So
it's about time we have some positivity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're all about here. It is hard, but we'll persevere and we'll get there eventually. I think we're all just missing out on the fact that our winter break has been extended indefinitely. I don't think any of us would have seen this coming.
What are we talking about? We're on a life break at the moment.
But usually in times like this we rely on sport, and most notably in this case Formula One in particular, to help get us through those lull moments. But unfortunately the one thing we all turn to in this case is now gone. We don't know when it's going to come back, so hopefully this will pass sooner rather than later. But
well, if we all behave, then it will.
True. I mean, it is taking a while for some people to get the message. I know last week I was out on runs respecting social distancing when I was exercising, and there were still people walking around in big groups, people really not getting the message. And I mean, I don't want to talk about this too much, but it does really annoy me when people just feel that when we're in a position where we all have to join together and actually do our part to make sure that we deal with this as swiftly and as easily as possible, there are always going to be people that think they're invulnerable, or this doesn't apply to them, or they're not at risk.
I got verbal abuse at work.
Really?
Yeah, people. So we've shut off all the working areas at the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, not only protect the public, but to protect us from getting it. Because if we all get struck down by it, there's not going to be anyone to look after the animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we put barriers up, and people walk through, and like one fella is like, "You do your job. You're not a security guard. Do your job." And I'm well, I am. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing my job. And then he tried to get threatening and stuff. And I just looked at him like, "You really are a fool, aren't you? You're just a fool."
Yeah.
I think that's the best way. Just all these people that don't understand. And it's a simple thing. He could have just walked around. It would have taken him five, maybe 10 minutes more max. But he would have like, say, potentially spreading a potentially killer disease.
Wait, so he wasn't there to see the animals. He just wanted to take a shortcut.
Yes.
Oh, what a twat! Honestly, it's I'm not one of those people that sort of looks at that and thinks, what is wrong with people. I kind of look at a situation that and think to myself, really, you were the fast.
There are people that just don't like to be told what to do, though. That's what it all comes down to. They have authoritarian issues.
No, it's true. And it's almost that mental capacity or a lack of intelligence for some people where you kind of question, so you were the fastest swimmer of all the sperm when your parents conceived you. You were the first one to reach the okay. Now, you're just almost like...
They're a waste of sperm, that's what they are.
Yeah, that's a picture for all the younger listeners out there. Yeah, you've got the Discovery Channel. You're going to be stuck at home. You might as well learn about this anyway.
Waste of sperm. There you go. What a nice thing to be told.
Wait until your what they call them now? Is it sex ed classes? Well, they called them something else when we were in school. Wasn't that long ago.
What they called it was just all of us giggling, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think the teacher said to us. I remember it really well. We all sat in a session. And it was our head of year, funny enough, because he was covering, and he basically sat in the room and he said, right guys, I'm going to talk about intimate parts and genitalia and all of that stuff, things that you will not usually allowed to talk about. I'm going to give you 5 minutes now to say all the rude, funny words you could get so you can get it all out of your system so we can be mature. And I think by the time we'd finished, it was lunchtime. we
out your system, lads.
Yeah, the class started at 9 o'clock and everyone was just shouting this, I'm not going to repeat, but was shouting this, that and everything else. And it was absolutely hilarious. I'd never enjoyed a class so much in my life. Yeah, I think a few Durexes and that got thrown around, although there are other products of that kind out there, which, no more product placement here. So, yeah, so we'll move on to the Formula 1 stuff now. I think we've reminisced enough. On our
going back to the good old days before we was locked up by a virus.
Yeah, no, we didn't appreciate it as much as we probably should have. If you could do it all again. So
there you go, man. That's the way to do it.
Yeah. So moving on to some of the esports stuff that's been going on. So as we've mentioned on other podcasts in the past, there have been a few virtual online races that have taken the stage, really, taken the spotlight in the absence of Formula 1 and live sport. You've got not the Bahrain or the Veloce esports race is probably better called, or you've got the virtual GP that Formula 1 have been doing for the last couple of weeks, and the one of the race as well. And they had the episode, and this was the F1 esports version. They had a series called Challenge Lando. And this was an open challenge to Lando Norris from a few select people in the public eye, a few racers, and then some sim racers. What did you think of it, Court? Did you watch it?
I watched it. There were parts of it that were good, but I just felt like they... Alright, give me a moment. I'm going to give you like a bit of an analogy.
Alright, go on then.
Right, so you imagine there's like a clown, yeah? There's like a clown.
Yeah.
He's just sitting there. And you've got the presenters poking him with a stick to try and make him be a clown.
Yeah.
That's how I felt about it, because the presenters do other work. I'm not knocking them as presenters, but it just felt like the whole thing was like set up to make Lando Norris be really Lando Norrisy.
Yeah, it did seem a bit dry like that. It's like, I think one of the things about Lando that we all enjoy is his wit, or sometimes he might bring that sort of childish humour about him. And I think we have to understand that he's 19 years of age. So,
20 now.
Is he 20 now? Okay, fair enough. Yeah. You know, so he's the youngest driver on the grid, and you almost forget that sometimes, that, you know, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of those where, you know, he's really funny and some of the stuff is quite amusing in the moment. But as you said, when you're poking him with a stick, it's like, oh, Lando, do something funny, do something funny.
Yeah.
It just...
That's how I felt watching it.
It was quite disappointing, considering it was something that was heavily advertised, and I thought, I kind of look forward to it. I think that's one of the things we kind of look forward to at the moment in this lockdown, is to see something, you know, to cheer us up on a Sunday night. And it was quite a letdown. I think there was one moment in particular that I really enjoyed, and that was when he had that race with Ian Poulter, the golfer, the professional golfer, and Ian Poulter is not too bad on the Formula 1 game. He handles himself reasonably well, all things considered.
Well, he's been involved in several races now. Yeah,
that's right. You know, so he can drive. You know, he's capable in the Formula 1 game. I'm sure he runs probably with some assists. But then, you know, there are only really the serious esports drivers and a few people that play this regularly will drive with no assist. I mean, I drive with no assist, but the hardest part is not...
Yeah, you had to throw that in.
Well, of course, you know, I'm a bit of an avid F1 gamer, but the hardest part is to be consistent and not make mistakes rather than being fast. So that's always the harder thing. And in fairness, Ian drove really well, but the funniest part was that he had a 20-second head start over 5 laps, which I thought was ridiculous. Like, there was no way Lando was going to catch him. Even the world's fastest gamer, or someone like Daniel Beresnay, who drives for the Alfa Romeo esports series that's been driving in this as well, he wouldn't have made up a 20-second gap over 5 laps unless Ian Poulter was spinning the car every 5 seconds. But the funniest moment was when the lap before, the penultimate lap, Ian basically stopped to try and think, he thought it was the last lap, and stopped just before the line to try and drive across the line as Lando was coming, and he forgot that he still had another lap, so Lando's driven right past him, and then it's come to the realisation in Ian's head. You almost hear the moment where Ian realises what he's done, and it was just hilarious.
Yeah, he was genuinely angry with himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was so funny. But after that, yeah, it was just disappointing. It was almost like, this is quite anticlimactic, or they have, I don't know, I think maybe there's an issue where what they tried to do before, they wanted to get more Formula 1 drivers involved, but maybe they just weren't able to do it. I mean, I'm not sure
because some of them don't even have rigs, do they?
No, but I mean, Valtteri Bottas mentioned that he wanted to have a go, but he didn't have a rig, and by rig, guys, we mean a setup where you can drive, like with a steering wheel, the pedals, the seat, all of that to play. Because obviously there are pad players and there are wheel players, and the Formula 1 drivers, they're going to want a wheel. But then obviously those guys will be able to jump in and drive relatively quickly. They don't necessarily have to be too experienced. I mean, Nico Hülkenberg did the Bahrain Grand Prix for the virtual GP, and he hadn't driven the Formula 1 game much, but you sit in it, get used to 5 minutes, and it's almost like, it's like the real thing to a degree, in the sense where the drivers that from the real world of Formula 1 can get in one of them, drive around for 5-10 minutes, and it wouldn't be too much of an issue.
Because they're not feeling the G-forces or anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think personally, as I said, I've driven, the fastest car I've driven is like a Formula Renault car. And you do feel a difference immediately between that and driving on a rig. And obviously, the everyday rigs that you would buy in the shops for, like, let's say £700-800 altogether, which is usually the going price for a reasonably priced one. I think Fanatec did one that the esports drivers do, with the load cell pedals, the steering wheel, and the wheelbase. I think that probably set you back around £800 these days, and that's without the seat on top of that. So you're talking £1,000 if you include a decent seat on top of that, and it's a lot of money, but you do get a lot for it. But at the same time, all of the force feedback you get is in your hands with the steering wheel, and that can only do so much. Whereas when you're driving, like, even in my case, when it was a Formula Ford car, which could do 150 miles an hour, handle a couple of G, in it if you throw it about. You really feel it in the seat of your pants, and this is something Niki Lauda used to say. It's like, a good driver is one that doesn't drive with his hands, it's one that drives with his arse, because usually you're feeling the car literally in your arse.
Yeah.
And if it's going, you can feel it moving around. I know it sounds bad, but yeah.
You feel the car in your arse.
Roll credits.
I know what you get up to with the fucking lights go out.
Oh well, let's
I'm sorry,
I said,
caught me off guard.
oh, it's not as bad as some of the things that old Robbie Lyle was doing from AFTV when when people were deliberately calling in with these funny names and he was reading them out without realising what they were.
Oh no.
That was hilarious.
Sorry, Aston, I'm gone. He was making a good point.
Yeah, but so it's not really the same thing, and you know that some of the esports drivers, some of them are pretty good. I mean, there was Igor Fraga, who's the former GT Sport champion, who actually is now driving real Formula open wheel cars, and he's competing and stuff like that. So they are capable, these guys, and you've got the world's fastest gamer. A Formula 1, I think Bono Huis or Rudy van Buren, who does the McLaren Shadow project and is a McLaren sim driver. So these guys do, you do get a case like that, but then the Formula 1 drivers, they can step into these rigs and get involved, and like Bottas was saying, he just needs to be set up with a rig more than anything else.
Ocon's starting to get involved with it, isn't he?
Yeah, so Esteban Ocon, he does a bit of GT Sport. And I'm sure he could drive the Formula 1 game. I know Pierre Gasly does it. Nicholas Latifi made his Williams debut. I'm sure George Russell would dabble in a bit of that. Charles Leclerc probably does.
Albon.
Yes, of course, yeah. Alex Albon too. Lewis Hamilton done a bit of GT Sport. Obviously, he endorsed that game. So I'm sure his brother Nick is very good sim racer as well. So there is that element, but I feel like the
problem with if the likes of Lewis or Sebastian Vettel were to go into it, I just think everyone would try to crash into them.
Yeah, no, that's the problem. But then, having said that, in these sorts of races, a lot of people are quite sensible, and then you get someone like Johnny Herbert, who decided, forget turn one, I'm just going to take a 10-second time penalty and go my own route, which was quite funny as well. So
why not?
Yeah, why not? But I think they need to go back to that rather than what they did last weekend with Challenge Lando. It just didn't really work.
I think they knew that though. I think you can tell they were thinking that as I was going through.
Yeah.
It is not working.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, yeah. So, on top of the esports, there's been a couple of news stories going around in the Formula 1 paddock. Most notably around in the Concorde Agreement. So, for those of you that don't know, the Concorde Agreement is the agreement that they refer to when the teams all sign up their commitments to participate in the Formula 1 World Championship. Now, the current one expires at the end of 2020, and a lot of teams are signing up for 2025 at the moment. The only team at the moment that hasn't officially signed up to this is Haas, but then at the moment that depends on whether or not Gene Haas wants to continue with this project with Haas.
Before it all kicked off, it wasn't looking particularly good.
No, and last season, if anything, didn't really help their cause, and pre-season didn't look good either. I mean, if anything, they were probably one of the biggest winners from the fact that we didn't have any racing at all. Purely and simply,
they could have well been. There's a possibility they could have been last.
Quite possibly. I mean, we made our predictions last season for this season going ahead. Sorry, I should say, and we were none of us were even close, to be honest. But but our credibility is still there. We just have to wait and see what happens. It's a crazy time to remember. But yeah, so the Concorde Agreement negotiations from November 2019. Just as a background, the Formula 1 teams had received the first official drafted copy of the Concorde Agreement that would enter into force between 2021 to 2025. Unfortunately, the outbreak of COVID-19 and the consequent economical crisis has stopped those negotiations. Now, this is a big problem because it's not so much the issue with the disease or the virus itself, it's the economic crisis that's followed that's the real problem, because there are a lot of teams that have invested a lot of money and a lot of resources into these cars, which they'll be able to use next season as well. Obviously there'll be a developed version, if that at all, because of the delay.
Yeah, you get the feeling that like this car will almost be like a 1.5 season car, don't you really?
Yeah, I mean obviously we've had development for this will be the second season of this new batch of cars, but it's going to be extended further to facilitate this. But unfortunately the problem is that because of the economic crisis, teams are not able to make money, they're not able to generate revenue from their normal sources and sponsorships and everything else that come with it. As a result, what they've got is basically a field or a fleet of white elephants where they're not able to use it. I mean, obviously the bigger teams will be fine, you know, they'll be hit hard, but they'll manage. It's the smaller teams where this is an issue, and as a result there have been discussions mooted about revisions to the budget cap, which currently sits at $175 million. There could be more drastic change to move that to $100 million. And so one team principal sent a letter saying, and I'll quote this, he said, I don't know which one it was, but he said, before any team signs up for 5 years, we all need to know if we can survive the crisis. There is currently no talk of this topic. There are more important things to do now. All the teams want to have a clear vision on what is going to be frozen in 2021 and what it's not going to be. Now, one of those things, for example, is the gearbox development. Now, Ferrari and Red Bull, this affects them in particular because there have been talks about freezing the gearbox development for next year, whilst we have this delay to the 2021 regulations happening in 2022. And what Ferrari and Red Bull want to do, from what I've heard, is they want to redesign their gearboxes or redevelop them, because what they found was that Mercedes seems to have an advantage in this area, especially in an aerodynamic fashion. And this is because they have smaller elements within their gearbox, which allows them to free up more space and gives them more of an aero advantage. It's more tightly packaged. So if the rules on this were to freeze, that development for Ferrari and Red Bull, they would not be able to invest resources into that and therefore improve their gearbox and engine performance. And you might think, oh well, how much more performance can you get from a little bit of space? But this is Formula One. We literally deal with fine margins, so I can imagine there's quite a huge tangible benefit.
You can imagine how heavily analysed that Mercedes car is, though. I can imagine.
Well, I mean,
imagine how much.
I would love. Do you know what I would love to see right now in this coronavirus outbreak is James Allison doing more of those analytical videos where he walks around his the Mercedes of yesteryear and obviously the current one, just to kind of in that reassuring manner that he always seems to do so well, and he makes learning about aerodynamics and car engine stuff really fun. I don't know why, maybe just really, I'd love for him to be able to teach me about that stuff. I'd literally sit on his voice for hours and just listen to what he has to say. But, you know, something like that to kind of, even if it's just talking about the rubbish that we go on about on a podcast, just to sit there and just, you know, kind of, I don't know, just makes you feel a bit better about things. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
That's a very nice thing for you to say about someone, Adam.
No, I genuinely mean this, because, I mean, I'm a Ferrari fan, and James Allison did a lot of good work at Ferrari, and of course, I'm not going to go into the reasons why he went to Mercedes. It was more personal. I'm sure hardcore fans will know, but I won't dive into that. But he's one of the, until he went to Mercedes, he was appreciated very much at Lotus and Ferrari as well, but I really do feel that a lot of the talk of the past has been about Adrian Newey as the guru for designing Formula One cars, and Adrian always had a way of conveying this information or kind of enlightening people on his genius, and we're getting that from James Allison in this modern technological era, this hybrid era that we haven't really seen for some time, and it is quite refreshing to see that, and I feel like it does make listening about and learning about Formula One fun, in the same way that if anyone's seen Vsauce videos with Michael, people might find science boring, but you watch those videos and it makes science fun, you know, some of the stuff that they talk about. So Yeah, maybe something like that. We need a bit more of that in this time to kind of give us a bit more of a lift.
We'll be seeing a lot of innovations when it comes to entertainment, I'm sure.
Hopefully so. I mean, in addition to what's been going on with the Concorde Agreement, just getting back to that, another issue that we noticed was its driver contracts. And with this Concorde Agreement expiring in 2020, of course, the stipulations of the coronavirus and what's been going on at the moment with the economic crisis, it does create potential problems beyond that in terms of a personnel perspective. Now, we've heard rumours about some of the teams discussing the possibility of extending the 2020 season into 2021, i.e. finishing in January. I think Mattia Binotto had mentioned in an interview not too long ago that this was a very, very likely possibility. And with the lack of development that I imagine will be going on with these cars, there might be little bits. They won't need to have a massive overhaul because they'll have another year to work on the 2022 cars, as they would be. But from what I understand, the Concorde Agreement, as I said, hasn't been signed for 2021 to 2025, and it expires in 2020. But on top of this, there are 13 drivers on the grid that have contracts that expire at the end of the year. So there is that element to it too, one of which is Sebastian Vettel at Ferrari, for example.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I will mention Sebastian Vettel, for example. I know there's a few other drivers, for example, Valtteri Bottas, Lewis Hamilton as well, another driver who hasn't yet confirmed his new deal. But obviously there's...
Does it expire at the end of this season as well?
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying, Lewis Hamilton, yes.
Oh.
But we're expecting that to be confirmed sooner rather than later. But obviously with what's going on, that's kind of not really taken centre stage. But I'm sure they've had discussions over the phone. But yeah, the Sebastian Vettel situation, I think we can talk about that a bit, actually. It brings us round.
That's the one that intrigues me the most.
Now, the latest I've heard on this is that, as Ferrari said for quite some time, Sebastian is the number one option. You know, that's been made clear. Binotto has stated countless times that in an ideal world, if both parties are happy, then Sebastian will stay at Ferrari. However, it seems that the major tipping point, or the stalemate at the moment, is that Sebastian wants more of a long-term deal, whereas Ferrari seem to only be offering him a one-year contract at this time, because they want to keep their options open, which makes sense.
If they're saying he's like the number one, you know, pretty much trying to say he's the number one driver, then why? You know, I imagine from his perspective, he probably sees that they're giving him mixed messages.
Well, when I say number one option, I mean, like, of all the drivers that are available for next year, Sebastian is the number one choice, and that includes...
So you don't consider him as number one driver then?
No, I mean, yes, he's the senior head at the team, and he's been that way for a while, and of course, Charles had a great breakthrough season towards the latter parts, but I do feel right now, considering those, when you take that into account, that both drivers are, they kind of have an equal status in the team. Which I think would be a fair assessment. Given Sebastian's contract situation, I don't think you could consider him to be an out-and-out number one driver. However, if Ferrari were in a position to win a world championship and both were fighting for it, I do feel Ferrari would prioritise Seb, even though...
Experience.
Yeah, it would prioritise him more than anything else because, you know, as you said, experience, but I still feel in a title fight at the moment, as quick and as good as Charles is, I haven't seen him be really tested yet. So it's hard to tell what Charles would do. But yeah, so it's an interesting point. So it got me thinking about what drivers in the current market that are available would we like to see at Ferrari. And so I'm going to ask you that, Courtney. Of all the drivers that are available that you are aware of, which driver do you think... And bear in mind, I want you to consider this as a realistic option, so not like a hypothetical ideal dreamland situation where Lewis Hamilton all of a sudden says, I want to go to Ferrari, this is happening. I'm talking about the drivers that realistically are interested in Ferrari and have a good chance of joining them if the call came? Who would you like to see at Ferrari to replace Seb Vettel?
I wouldn't say I'd like to see it happen, and you'll understand why when I say it. But I think Carlos Sainz.
Oh, now that's interesting.
Yeah, I think he deserves another shot in a bigger team.
Well, he never really.
I think he's been solid. He's been solid at McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, because we could argue very much so that if things had worked out a little bit better in his relationship with Red Bull during his Toro Rosso days, he'd very much be Max Verstappen's teammate right now, and that would be absolute box office to watch them two.
And that's the problem. They didn't really get on well with Toro Rosso, so that's why they wouldn't have him at Red Bull.
No, and I think the Red Bull program has completely isolated itself to being Max Verstappen's team, and of course, if he has a teammate which is capable of driving on his level and pushing him to his limits, then great, but at the moment it's hard to say if there are many drivers on the grid that can do that, which would be available. Carlos is definitely one of those guys in my mind that could do that. I was thinking maybe Ferrari may want to go for someone a little bit more experienced than Carlos Sainz, and perhaps Daniel Ricciardo.
If Leclerc is there, I don't think Vettel would want to have Ricciardo as a teammate again.
No. I think I'm kind of basing this on the assumption that if Sebastian Vettel left Ferrari at the end of the season, I mean, Charles Leclerc is the future of Ferrari. I can't see any reason why Charles would not be there for, in some ways, the rest of his career, depending on how well that goes. He was drafted into Ferrari very, very early in his career. It was almost unheard of years ago. Not even Michael Schumacher would have driven. Of course, he drove for Benetton, and that was his. Obviously, after his one race at Jordan, and he had a couple of races at Jordan in '92, and then joining Benetton a year later. But it was one of those where Charles was thrusted into a big position. That's the driver academies for you. You end up in these positions very quickly. But obviously, we'll discuss that in more detail in due course. But yeah, I think Daniel Ricciardo, a great race driver, very entertaining, very popular. He's wanted that Ferrari seat for quite some time, and he's never been shy to admit that he'd be interested if the call came coming. I mean, and Renault are aware of this. I don't feel Renault are as reluctant to losing Ricciardo as they may have been a year ago when they first.
They've got a good driver in Ocon.
Absolutely, and I think in Renault's mind they've got their marquee French driver. Of course, Daniel Ricciardo is very popular. But I wouldn't exactly say where Renault's going at the moment, where they feel that they're in a position where, they need to keep Ricciardo at all costs. I'm sure they have a few. I mean, for example, Guan Yu Zhou from Formula 2, who, when the season does get underway, is my pick to win the F2 Championship. He was very impressive as a young Renault Academy driver last season. And I definitely feel that if the opportunity came in F1, he could make the step up into the Renault team. And obviously that backing from China, the sponsorship as well, will help them a great deal in terms of their funding, because even though they're a works team, they don't really operate like one in terms of the financial strength, which could really help them a lot. So, yeah, I don't think Renault are that reluctant to losing someone like a Ricciardo. He's a race winner. He's very famous for winning Grand Prix where the opportunity presents itself, and he takes full advantage of it. Is he on the level of a Max Verstappen or a Lewis Hamilton or a Sebastian Vettel at their peak? Hard to say. I think
the only comparison you can draw there is the 2014 season with Vettel.
Yeah, and even then, I think as good as he was and as bad as Vettel was, it was definitely a situation where we had a Red Bull car which was not really a proper Red Bull car. It was more Toro Rosso than Red Bull, and that suited Daniel to a T, whereas Seb struggled to adapt. And I think I think the one hallmark of Seb's abilities as a driver is that if you give him a car that suits him down to a T, he's as quick as anybody. But if you give him a car that he has to really adapt to, he does take some time to adjust, and he can struggle. I mean, we see that for Ferrari last year when the front end was so bad, and the rear end wasn't that great either. Seb did struggle where Charles shined at certain Grand Prix. So yeah, no, that would be my thoughts on it. Just trying to. So yeah, I mean, in addition to this, the FIA have also approved a raft of rule changes for 2020 and 2021. There was a meeting in light of the challenges faced by the coronavirus pandemic. The World Motorsport Council has approved via an e-vote, so they all did this online, a series of changes to the 2020 and 2021 Formula 1 regulations, and this was on their website. And it talks about some regulations, a delay to the introduction of the 2021 regulations by a year to 2022. They had already unanimously agreed this, and the World Motorsport Council has now rubber stamped that move and allowing certain regulations to be adjusted. It goes on to say there's going to be further measures introduced, including the homologation of the survival cell from 2020, which is talking about the cockpit area for the driver, and certain other components. One example that they do highlight is the Mercedes dual axis steering system, or DAS if you like. That's going to be outlawed from next year. We knew this. We'd heard rumours about this was going to happen, and they've officially done that now. So I can't see in the light of this and the investment any other teams copying it. To be honest, I'm not even sure Mercedes are going to use it that much.
They do seem particularly, like drivers didn't seem particularly keen to use it, did they? Really?
No, they used it in parts, but I just felt that
it might be a track specific thing.
Maybe. I mean, it just seemed in testing that they weren't 100% sure if they could realise a true benefit. Of course, we all put out our theories. Obviously, one of the early episodes, I went into depth on this and looked at the benefits, and I thought it was a brilliant piece of innovation. However, it just seems that perhaps there isn't much that can be gained from this, or perhaps we have to remember, Red Bull did say after the Australian Grand Prix was postponed that if Mercedes were planning on using this, Red Bull would go into protest and probably put that to an end as well. And Ferrari mentioned they couldn't find a benefit either. So perhaps considering what Mercedes have done, it's probably not going to happen. But it's a shame because they've obviously put time and effort into this. And we do often find that when teams come up with these innovations, which almost seem genius and difficult to copy, rather than teams trying to spend money and time to develop their own systems to improve their cars, they just get it banned, get it outlawed. That's usually the way it goes, unfortunately.
Well, you know, they didn't. As I said, the drivers didn't seem particularly keen on it. So, but you know, the problem is there's so many ifs and buts, and we're into how many races into the season would we be if it was a normal season?
Right now, I believe it would be 2 races in this season. So Bahrain would have been the weekend before last, and this weekend coming would have been the Vietnamese Grand Prix. It would have been.
Yeah, so we'd have had some questions answered already, and it's quite frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I mean, we painted our pictures where we thought the season would be, but we may never truly know because teams will eventually, when the Formula 1 season gets back, I mean, of course, there's going to be a shutdown of manufacturing works, but there'll be certain things they'll want to do, certain things they'll want to learn, but right now the thoughts are really totally elsewhere. I mean, teams have been applying their efforts elsewhere, thankfully, to fight this COVID-19 situation. Teams have been helping out, working on ventilators in their respective companies. Ferrari have been doing work. And of course, that ties us nicely in with Mercedes. A genius piece of innovation where they've developed a breathing aid or a ventilator system that can help keep COVID-19 patients out of intensive care. And this was something that was adapted by mechanical engineers at UCL or University College London and clinicians at UCLH working with Mercedes AMG high-performance powertrains, which has been approved for use in the NHS. And obviously they're going to be rolling those out very, very soon, which is fantastic to hear. I mean, they reversed engineered one of these breathing apparatuses, and it took them 100 hours to find a way to improve it and make it better and just roll it out. I mean, that is incredible to do that.
That's the thing. People forget this about Formula 1 engineers. They have some of the smartest engineers in the world.
Yeah.
People forget that. I just make racing cars. No, these people are some of the smartest engineers in the world.
Yeah, and they really need to take advantage of these situations like this, because it's incredible what Formula One is capable of in terms of the road car industry. They lead the way. They're heaps and bounds ahead of everything else.
Oh, they're bringing innovation. So like hybrid technology. Look how far hybrid technology has come because of it all.
Yeah, and road car developers don't even take full advantage of this. Like, for some reason, they don't utilise it as effectively as perhaps they could. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why that is the case, and we could go into it with our own theory, but it's not that kind of podcast, really. No. We don't want to sort of lower the tone.
No.
But no, it's great to see Mercedes and some of the other teams as well doing their part to help in this situation. It's great to see the world come together and see all these innovations and these pieces of equipment being developed in ways that we can save lives. And we'll just hope that when this is all over, that we learn a great lesson, that we need to stock up and make sure that we're prepared for future situations. Because one thing that this has done is show the world that we are woefully unprepared for a crisis that is on the level of something that was realised 100 years ago during the Spanish flu. Hopefully we don't have anywhere near the number of casualties that we did then. So
but it shouldn't, but it's caught everyone off guard.
Yeah,
that's the main thing. We're all being caught off. You worded it in your own way, but yeah, we've all been caught off guard by it. We can't allow life to come to a standstill in this day and age.
No, and we have to kind of take that into consideration, but obviously learn from this. Hopefully, as many people as can beat this and survive this, and we can use this as an opportunity now to sort of realise, right, we need to start doing what we can to protect human life and animal life and plant life, all of that. So yeah, coming back to the meeting, so the FIA, sorry, I should say, updated their website to include some of the things that were agreed with the World Motorsport Council. Here's a few other points. I won't go too much into depth with these, but so they mentioned the addition of Article 1.3. So in order to be able to change certain articles, they required a unanimous agreement between the teams. Now, John Todt has been given the power to enforce changes to certain articles with only 60% of support. So with 10, so basically what that means is just a majority. Doesn't matter how big a majority, but a majority nonetheless. So with 10 teams, 60% is 6 teams. Yeah. So you won't be in a position with a stalemate to agree that, which one thing. They also included the permission for the FIA and Formula 1 to change the calendar without a vote, which was the deletion of Article 5.5. So of course, a lot has been up in the air with 3-day weekends being moved to 2 days to minimise the workload, and also to incorporate races which can happen back to back for 4 weeks straight, just to get it all in the calendar. Changes to testing. We don't know what that's going to be, but I believe that's to do with the young drivers test, where they may, rather than have 3 test sessions, it may just be 1 big test on the day. Which obviously is a bit of a pain for some teams, because drivers like George Russell, Lando Norris in particular, that have benefited from this, and Charles Leclerc in previous seasons, to get a better understanding of a Formula 1 car, that's not going to happen now. So drivers that are looking to make that next step up soon, like for example Mick Schumacher, who seems destined for a Formula 1 seat at some point in the next year or two, he's going to have a harder time being able to have more exposure to Formula 1 cars, most likely driving in an Alfa Romeo or even a Ferrari, which he has done last year. Changes to permissible power unit elements if the number of races reduces. So this is an interesting one. So the minimum number of races to complete this F1 season at the moment still stays at 8 races. However, there obviously is the belief that we can try and get around 16, 17 races like the older seasons used to have. But,
yeah, that's right, yeah.
So obviously with that in mind, if we reduce the number of races that are going to happen over the course of the season, that would also mean that there's going to be less races to do, so there'll be less power units or less equipment as a cost saving measure. So it's not a case of teams will now have less races to use their current power units or current components that fit in, like the ICE, or the internal combustion engine, the turbocharger, the electric charge, the battery, all of that stuff, they won't be able to take advantage of this. So it's to try and rationalise it in a way where you're sort of making sure that they're using what they should be. Which, so the engine's still going to be tested. There's the banning of aero development for the 2022 regulations during 2020, which officially started from this Saturday just gone. So what that means is, we were talking before about teams putting their tools down to not develop the 2020 cars so that they can focus on 2021 cars until 2022. That has now stopped. Now, the reason that that's been put in place is we're in a position now where, yes, the teams are not working on the cars and they can work until 2020 to develop these cars for 2021 as well. But the 2021 cars, which are now being rolled out in 2022, stay with me guys on this one, the teams are now no longer allowed to develop them up until a certain point. So no more work's happening on the 2021 cars for now, until a certain point where they'll allow them to start working again. So this avoids a situation where a big team like a Ferrari, Mercedes or Red Bull can say, okay, well, the 2020 cars are okay, but we're going to throw hundreds of millions of dollars now developing these 2022 cars for an extra year, so they're going to be absolutely fantastic by the time we roll them out. Whereas the smaller teams, especially in an economic crisis that we're facing because of COVID-19, can't do that because they're trying to stay afloat. And then you'd end up in a situation where they could be 2-3 seconds faster than them by the time the Australian Grand Prix rolls out in March 2022.
No one wants to see that.
No. I mean, these rules are put in place to bunch the pack together. And I'm glad that they've done this. So, it's, obviously there's some changes to the chassis, transmission and suspensions even for 2021. So, there can be some aero developments that would be allowed next season. I know Ferrari were, of the 10 teams, only one really needed more time to think about this, and this was Ferrari. And Mattia Binotto said, look, we just need time to consider our options. We're not saying no to freezing on the development. We just want to make sure we're happy with this. I think they're more open to the idea of getting on board with this, providing it suits everybody fairly and that. And of course, I'm sure in due course Ferrari will probably get on the boat if everyone else is already on board with it.
Yeah, they're a smart lot, aren't they, at Ferrari? I'm sure they're thinking about every avenue before they come to the engine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The aim of this, in terms of when the season is going to restart, when it does, I don't know, but they're still aiming for a June date. So Baku, that is still the date. I know. Please. I know people have been talking about races being cancelled and there's a threat for that, but they're still aiming for Baku. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one.
That would. Can you just imagine? Can you even imagine? We're living in desperate times. Can you imagine if they just said, "That's it. Season's going to start at June so and so." It gives you something to look forward to.
It really does, and I think what they're hoping for is a situation where if everyone sticks to their lockdown, what's been enforced in their separate countries, it will allow, and obviously there's going to be more and more people that get infected with this virus that are going to recover from this and develop an immunity on this. There's the sense that hopefully by June we'll return to a situation similar to what China are going through at the moment and South Korea, where people are now starting to go out a bit more. They're able to go back to work to some degree. Of course, it's not back to normal completely, but they're in a position now where they're in control of the virus. Less people are getting infected. I think in China, and I said, I don't know how true these reports are, so take them with a pinch of salt, but apparently there were 6 days in succession that they had not too long ago where they had 0 recorded new cases.
Whoa.
Which is a good thing if it's true.
If it's true,
but
yeah.
As I said, trust Chinese state media as you wish. I'm not going to say whether or not I trust it or not, but it's interesting to see. And I wouldn't.
Let's not go there.
I wouldn't suggest that it is or not true. So take that as you want. But no, it's a good sign if things are improving, and hopefully that will continue. But of course, in other countries, in more densely populated areas like London, for example, where we live, it's very easy for people to get infected, and these cases are still rising. So, at the
even if they have the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, like they were going to run the Bahrain Grand Prix.
Yes.
That would be, if they could find a way to take precautions and quarantine the teams, then go for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's probably a good point to mention. So yeah, so that's basically what's been going on in the news. There's quite a lot actually. We've gone through 50 minutes going through that. Jeez.
Gee.
So I think just to sort of round this last bit off, then I think 10-15 minutes I think we can do. I wanted to talk about something that myself and Courtney, obviously, as Formula One fans for a long time, and I know there are a lot of fans out there that have watched Formula One for years but never actually been to a Grand Prix. And funny enough, Courtney and I, obviously, we've been to a Grand Prix, not together, at least not yet anyway, but funny enough, we've been to the Belgium Grand Prix ourselves. And we went, what was it, 15 years apart that we went? When did you go, Courtney?
That sounds about right, yeah, 2015.
Ah, yeah, so 14 years, because I went to the 2001 race. And I figured it might just be, for those of you that haven't been, it might be just worth us talking about our experiences, what it was like for us then. So, Courtney, if you want, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I like the, 'cause you can get different type of tickets, can't you? You can get seating, or you can get I forgot the actual description of it, but it's almost like a free roamer ticket where you could go around like all the banks and stuff like that, and I really enjoyed doing that. So on Friday I went to one location, then a different location on the Saturday, and then another one on the Sunday, and I like that idea that you could like get different vantage points of the action, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that idea.
Because when you went up to where the Kemmel Straight was, didn't you? After Radion.
No, yeah, I was on the Kemmel Straight on Friday. Then Saturday, you've got like the long winding corner. It feels a little bit like Turkey.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you mean. So that was the original Radion, what they used to call Radion.
Yeah, so
yeah.
The long winding left-hander.
Yeah. I know. Oh right. Sorry, I'm thinking of a different place altogether. So yeah. So you're at Blanchimont.
The long winding left-handers.
What, Pouon?
Yeah. I believe so. Yeah.
Are you talking about Pouon? Is that the corner? So you got Lacom, the old Radion. Then you got No Name, where the Astra is on the right-hand side, and then you got that corner that are in 7th gear. Yeah, Pouon. Yeah.
That's it. You just got to keep it going. So we play the game a lot.
No, well, that's how you know I'm a big Formula One fan. I know all the corners off by heart.
Yeah. And then on race day, I was at the pit stop chicane at the end.
Oh, the old bus stop chicane, yeah.
Yeah.
That was.
Did I say bus stop or pit stop? I can't remember.
It is set tomato. It's changed a lot. So obviously, when I went, it was the other way round. It was it was the chicane that went left to right. But it was 2 chicanes. So you had one that goes a left to right chicane, and then it was like a little mini one that you sort of just go straight over the bumps. That's pretty cool. I mean, it was a completely different world when I went. When I went, this was back in 2001, and this was for my 10th birthday, and we went on, it was one of those like coach tour things, like big group things, where we went on this coach in Victoria, we got on a ferry over to Calais in France, and then we just drove straight through to Brussels, where we stayed for the weekend. So there's a bit of a contrast for what you had. So we lived in a nicest hotel, and it was like 2 hours away from Spa.
Yeah, I camped with the. I was surrounded by Max Verstappen fans.
Yeah, the hardcore, the Orange Army. Your favourite fans.
Imagine what I was like. I didn't get much sleep.
Your favourite fans, Courtney. I bet you loved it with them lot.
Well, you got to remember that was just when Max Verstappen was coming onto the scene. That this was when he was at Toro Rosso.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
And that's when it started. That's when it.
The plague.
When I don't eat or sleep properly, I'm a horrid person.
Oh yeah, I can vouch for that. Right miserable old git you are, yeah.
So yeah, Yeah, they were having the Euro trash parties, and I didn't get much sleep. So.
But then when you're there, it's like going to a festival. You can party, you get drunk, you have a good time. Everyone's having a good time, and you never get any sleep at those places. The last thing you want when you're hungover is V6 turbo Formula 1 cars. Although, having said that, you're lucky because I went when it was the old V10s back in 2001. Oh wow, like it was frightening. Like the first time I went, I was walking up the circuit and it was a Friday morning and we got there for first practice.
Yeah.
And I remember it so, I literally will remember this so vividly well. We had these little earplugs like the ones you stick in your ears anyway. And I remember not putting them in properly, and all I heard coming out of turn 1 was the sound of Ralf Schumacher in his BMW Williams coming, just literally revving it and just driving up to where we were sitting. So we were sitting after turn 1, overlooking where the old Formula 3 pitch used to be. And literally just went down towards Eau Rouge and Radion, and it was so loud I literally could feel it in my bones. It literally just shakes you. It's frightening how loud they were. It's you know, it's sad that we'll never hear that again in person as fans. But I tell you what, it was unbelievable hearing that noise, and it was a really great weekend. I mean, it was also the weekend England beat Germany in the football 5-1 in Munich. That classic. It was that weekend as well. It was a great weekend. It was also, it was an interesting race as well. I remember it really well because the Williamses were meant to start at the front, and then Montoya got relegated to the back of the grid and he had problems. And then Michael Schumacher ended up starting on pole, and he just literally had the race from the front. And it was quite funny because on our coach that we were travelling, we had a sweepstake going. And everyone would pull out a driver number, and whoever's driver number you got, you didn't want that car to win, you wanted that car to finish third to make it interesting, because obviously winning is like, oh well, you know, the obvious guys are going to win. You know, it's either going to be a Ferrari, a McLaren or a Williams. And what happened was, the funniest part was, someone pulled out number 1 and they literally started crying because they got Michael Schumacher. Literally world champion in a rich vein of form. Is like Lewis Hamilton now. It's like, oh great, Lewis ain't coming third. There was one position that Michael and Lewis would not get very often, and that was third place. It was either like win or second.
Win or that, you're right.
That's it. Yeah. It was quite funny. He was just literally crying. Everyone would just laugh when he pulled out, because we all thought he got like a Minardi. So it was like Tarso Marquez, and funny enough, Fernando Alonso in his debut season was at Minardi. And yeah, he ended up with Schumacher. It was quite funny. I think on the end of it, there was quite a bit of a debate because David Coulthard had finished third on the road, but he got a penalty, and then that wasn't discovered until later that night. So the person that thought they'd won with David Coulthard ended up losing because Giancarlo Fisichella got promoted to third place.
Oh shit!
So they lost their sweepstake. Yeah, it was quite quite an interesting story about that one. But yeah, no, it was a great race. I remember quite fondly where we were sitting. It was quite funny. You'd have Michael Schumacher going through, and then you'd have Ralf Schumacher, Mika Hakkinen, Rubens Barrichello, of course, and the rest of them all coming through in the pack, like loads of really loud V10s going full throttle. It was brilliant to see. And then about half a minute later, you'd have Tarso Marquez in the Minardi, because the Minardis were dreadful, and Tarso Marquez was a paid driver from Brazil who wasn't really Formula 1 material. He wasn't a bad driver, but he just was well out of his depth. And my dad used to just point and laugh. It was almost like he'd say, get out, have a cigarette, as he called it, and literally get back in the car and come back and do another lap and then go out and have a coffee afterwards. It was just quite funny. Take the mic. And funny enough, in that race, it was remembered for two things. One, Luciano Berti drove in the Prost, the old purple Prost car. Most famous, that car, for Olivier Panis winning the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix, which we're actually going to discuss in a future episode about that sort of nostalgia as a motorbike drives down there. Should be at home, self-isolating. What's he doing? Unless that's someone's delivery, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone's dinner. Yeah, and you know, he had a big crash. In Puy, funny enough, in Puyon, he literally the car just lost control and he went straight into the wall. And also, it was a race that, because of that, the race had to restart. And unfortunately, Fernando Alonso was not able to restart the race because his Minardi had broken down and he wasn't able to get into the T car. So he ended up being classified as did not start. Even though he took part of the first part of the race, he wasn't able to rejoin. So that's why I think it was a couple of years ago when Fernando was going to break the record for the most number of races at the time. He wasn't able to do it because some people thought he'd done it, but then forgot that technically he didn't because he didn't get that race as one of his appearances.
This is why you should never bet on Formula One. You never bet on it because there's so many different things that can change even after a race result.
Well, that's it. That's why they always say the provisional or unclassified result. They always used to say that on the old broadcast on ITV with Murray Walker. You always say this is the unclassified result because these things can change. I mean, do you remember, what year was it? Was it the Italian Grand Prix in 2016 where the two Mercedes drove on, they dominated the race by about half a minute. And they were on lean engine mode. They were so quick. And Vettel came third in the Ferrari. And what had happened was there was an investigation over the tyre pressures on the Ferrari, on the Mercedes. Right. And there was that big long investigation that almost went into the night until eventually, despite the fact that the tyre pressures were deemed to be below the parameters that Pirelli had suggested, they didn't disqualify the Mercedes cars from the race. So it was almost like if you're betting on the Mercedes to dominate and win, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, hold on. Like, you know, you can't really catch it. Yeah, it's just crazy. Or the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix as well, if you remember that rain that got stopped after the big crashes for Mark Webber and Fernando Alonso in the wet weather. And Kimi Raikkonen had passed Fisichella to win the race. But because of the count back, owing to red flag situations where if a race is stopped, you count back the result from 2 laps prior, Raikkonen had not passed Fisichella before that, so Fisichella ended up being awarded the win 6 days later.
Can you imagine if you win that bet?
Well,
if 6 days later you get told.
Yeah.
Gutting. That'd be gutting.
Well, imagine the silly person that betted money on Fisichella in the 2003 Jordan, which was less than impressive. It was a midfield runner, but not a massively strong one. Ended up being told that they won the race.
Oh, yeah, dude, that's why to see it, like positive thinking. Think about that one guy.
Yeah.
That bet on winning that race.
Well, this is a race where so many people crashed out. I remember it well. Like Coulthard crashed out. You know, Alonso had his big crash in the Renault, which stopped the race. Whereby Michael Schumacher spun out on turn 3, just lost all grip and just kept going. Barrichello used to retire from the Brazilian Grand Prix on a yearly basis. It was like a curse for him. Do you remember that? Rubino in his Ferrari. I think it might have been 2003. That might have been the year actually where he was gonna win, and then the Ferrari always just seemed to break down. His one always broke down at Brazil. It was. I never noticed.
The Brazilians do have a little bit of a curse.
Yeah, I mean Felipe won a few. Yeah, Massa won a few races at Brazil, but unfortunately, the one that we'll remember the most always is the 2008 race, where he was world champion for about 15 seconds.
And then even Senna,
yes,
given his his level, he only won there twice.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, but no, it was great memories. I mean, I definitely recommend it for anyone who was thinking about going to a Formula One race when eventually it all gets back underway. I would say yes, definitely do it. It's an incredible experience. Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to go when I was a kid during the V10 era, and it was something I'll never ever forget. I certainly won't forget the noise.
Definitely go to one of the European races that have the support series.
Yes,
yeah. Hold down it.
Well, yeah. I mean, they had this as well when I went. Of course, you'll remember they had it as well. That the GP2 and that. And when you go there, it's a whole weekend event. So you don't just turn up to watch the Formula One race. Of course, in Silverstone they have day tickets. If you want to turn up to just watch the Formula One on the Sunday, you can. But if you're going to do it, go for the weekend. If you have
because they had when all went, they had GP2, GP3, and they had Porsche Super Cup as well.
Yes, yeah, and it's a great way to see some of the stars of the future.
Yeah.
It's coming through to say this is where they started out. I was trying to think of a few that I saw. I remember seeing Mark Webber in a support race that season, because he then joined the Minardi team in 2002, where he famously got that 5th place on his debut, wasn't it? The Australian Grand Prix in the Minardi.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing him the year before in a support race in Belgium, and he looked pretty quick. I mean, Mark was always a quick driver. I think history won't give Mark Webber the justice he deserves in terms of his abilities, because he really was a quick driver. Very unlucky not to win the World Championship in 2012. He was leading up to Korea, and then he just completely binned it in that Korean Grand Prix, and then he just got completely taken out of the championship race between Alonso and Vettel at the end. So yeah, it's great times. I definitely recommend it for those that are interested. It's a great experience, and I'll always remember that. It was my 10th birthday as well, so you know, it was a great gift for my parents. And
yeah, like for something like, if you want to go for the grandeur, shall we say, then you go to Bahrain or Abu Dhabi. But if you want to go for like a raw Formula 1 experience, then definitely go to one of the European races.
I think Monza's on my bucket list. As a Ferrari fan, Monza's definitely on my bucket list.
So obviously, you know, so Spa, Monza, Silverstone, even Hungarian Grand Prix.
Yeah, Budapest is good. I mean, Budapest is always good for like going on a lad's holiday or away or stuff like that. Yeah. You can kind of, the good thing about Budapest is that the circuit's about 20 minutes away from the city centre, so you can kind of do both. You know, and it's not one of those tracks where it's massively packed, or you have to, you know, it's difficult finding a hotel and stuff like that, like some circuits are. So it's a great place to go if you wanted to, and it's before the summer break, so it's a great place to go if you want to go away with your lads for a weekend away.
Even Barcelona, I think it's a decent circuit.
Barcelona's good, although I might be tempted one year to go there for testing, just because they let more people in testing this year, and it proved to be quite successful. And you're there all day.
If we're doing the podcasts, we could do welcome to the DNF1 podcast live from day 2 of testing in Barcelona.
That's I like it. Yes. Yeah, just doing that. Yeah, we're recording it. They're all wondering what we're doing. It's like, don't worry, there's no cameras. Like, we're just doing it all on there.
Just me and my mic.
Yeah, just me and my mic. Don't mind us. We'll just commentate and it goes, oh, and there's Grosjean. Oh, and Ericsson's hit him again because he's in the wall. Wait. Where's Ericsson? No, he's nowhere.
There you go. You never know. We could be vlogging by then. You never know, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. You could go, and there's Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, and he's 2 seconds ahead of everyone else. Great. Or Ferrari are 2 seconds clear. They're clearly overstating their pace. They're not that fast. Australia, they're 4 seconds back. What's going on? Is it 2019 all over again?
Yeah, I was going to say, you clearly felt that.
Yeah, I know, that one hurt. That one hurt like an MF. I think that's a good way to end, actually, on a positive note. So, yeah. So, yeah, just to reiterate, guys, apologies once again for those of you that were expecting the Schumacher Hamilton episode. That is happening next week. Obviously, Courtney's going to be calling in again. So thank you for joining me once again, Courtney, this time via the phone. And yeah, I'll be looking forward to that episode. We've got this really looking forward to what we've prepared already. So stay safe, everyone. Take care of yourself. Stay positive. Do what you can to keep yourself busy. And we'll see you in the next DNF1 podcast this time next week.
See you soon.
See you later.